Hey, federal employees, this one isn't directly about your pay or agency, but it's a big deal for how government power gets used. Today, the Supreme Court is hearing a case called Learning Resources v. Trump. On the surface, it's about tariffs, but underneath, it's about how far a president's authority really goes. Here's the backdrop and why it's a big deal. So, under a 1977 law called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, presidents can regulate imports and exports during a national emergency. President Trump used that law to impose sweeping tariffs, new taxes on foreign goods, under what he called an economic emergency. The question in front of the Supreme Court is simple but huge. Does the power to regulate trade also mean the power to tax it? And if that sounds technical, here's why it matters. Congress controls taxation, one of government's biggest powers. That's the power of the purse, the cornerstone of checks and balances. If the court agrees that the president can use his emergency powers to set tariffs and taxes without explicit authorization from Congress, it would hand enormous economic authority to the executive branch, authority that can be used not just in foreign affairs, but in ways that shape the entire US economy. That's also part of a bigger trend we've been seeing. You've probably heard of the major questions doctrine, right? That's the idea that when the government finds a new huge power in an old law, especially one that affects major parts of the economy, the court could be skeptical. Well, it used that reasoning to strike down the student loan forgiveness plan and parts of EPA's climate authority. Now we're going to see whether the court applies the same standard to a Republican president using executive power expansively to tax. So, this case could tell us a lot about the future of separation of powers, not just in trade, but in agency authority more broadly. It could also tell us about the court. For federal employees, that's worth watching, because how the court defines limits of executive power doesn't just affect the White House. It affects every agency, every career servant, and how far political leadership can stretch the law before Congress has to step in. I'm watching this to see about the court's integrity. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think presidents have too much emergency power already? Should courts be skeptical of any president, Democrat or Republican, who tries to find massive authority in vague statutory language? Should the court treat presidents differently based on whether they're Republican or Democratic? Is flexibility important for national security? Does that apply to this case? Let me know what you think. Cases like this don't just shape the law, they shape how every federal employee experiences the limits of their own agency's authority. We'll see how the justices approach it today. I will predict a lot of pointed questions about the power of the purse and a serious test of whether major questions cuts both ways. We will see. I think this will be one that's interesting. I'm watching it to try to predict to what extent the court is willing to apply principles to Trump, right? There are some ways for them to wiggle out, but it might get a little interesting. So anyway, thank you everybody for your support. Take care and have a great day.